The crystal stem of the champagne flute felt impossibly slender, a fragile stick of glass against the sudden, surprising strength in my 74-year-old hand. Across the long, polished mahogany of my own dining table, Arthur Finch was holding court, his silver-gray hair gleaming under the chandelier, his laugh a smooth, practiced baritone. He was telling an anecdote about my late husband, Robert. And Robert, bless him, looked the man dead in the eye and said, "The price is the price." Arthur chuckled, and the table, filled with our closest friends and business associates, chuckled with him. My son James, seated to Arthur's right, raised his own glass. "To Dad," he said, his voice thick with what a casual observer might mistake for grief. I knew it was greed. "And to Arthur, for holding the family together." "Hear, hear," someone murmured. Arthur inclined his head, his smile a perfect mask of benign humility. His eyes met mine across the candelabra. "To Margaret," he said, his voice dripping with a proprietary, pitying sort of kindness. "Our strong, silent Margaret. We're taking care of everything, my dear. You needn't worry your pretty head about a thing." He said it to reassure me, he said it to establish his control. He said it because he and my son believed I was a decorative, deaf, and monumentally stupid old woman. I smiled back, a gentle, trembling, newly widowed smile I had been perfecting for 3 months. My heart was not pounding. It was cold, still, and heavy. I let the smile linger, let him see the grieving widow, the broken relic. I had been waiting for this moment. I had planned the menu around it, a rich, heavy, classical French menu, the kind of food that suggests endings, not beginnings. I set my flute down with a soft, definitive click. The small sound cut through the lingering laughter. The room fell silent. "Arthur," I said, my voice not the quavering pipe they expected, but clear and cool as the water in the glasses. "There's a word for a man who steals from his best friend's widow. I believe it's ghoul, but accountant seems to fit just as well." The silence that followed was no longer polite. It was absolute. Arthur's smile didn't fall. It froze, a grotesque rictus. "Mother," James hissed, his face instantly blotchy and red. "You're overwrought. You don't know what you're saying." "Oh, but I do, James," I said, turning my gaze to my only son. "I know about the Miami deal. I know about the 200,000. Was that your signing bonus for helping Mr. Finch here plunder your father's legacy? For trying to sign your own mother into poverty?" This was the climax. But it started 3 months earlier, in a cloud of funeral lilies and suffocating, well-meaning casseroles. It started with a sentence. A single, perfectly polished, lethally condescending sentence. Robert had been dead for a week. The house, a sprawling Tudor monster in the best part of town, had finally emptied the last of the sympathetic mourners. The partners' wives, with their sharp eyes and soft voices, had finally taken their platters of untouched sandwiches and gone home. I was alone, in Robert's study, for the first time. The room still smelled of him, a comforting, masculine scent of old leather, cigar smoke, and the faint, tangy aroma of the single malt whiskey he favored. I wasn't a business wife. I was the other kind, the ornamental kind. Robert, a man carved from granite and ambition, loved me, I believe. But he loved me in the way he loved his prize-winning roses or his vintage Bentley, as a beautiful, perfectly maintained object that proved his success. My role was to host, to smile, to raise our son, and to never, ever ask about filthy numbers. "It's unbecoming, Marge," he would say, patting my hand, his voice final. That's my world. You just worry about our world. And so I had for 51 years. I had worried about the catering, the seating charts, the state of the garden, and the precarious, hollow state of our son, James, whom Robert had both spoiled and dismissed his entire life. But now, Robert was gone. A sudden, massive, and characteristically silent coronary. He had simply finished. And I, Margaret Winslow, 74 years old, was left with a silence that was death-making and a house full of things I didn't understand. I sat at his desk, the massive dark wood expanse that had always been his throne. I touched the green banker's lamp. I opened a drawer. It was filled with files, neat and tidy, Winslow Holdings, commercial properties, trusts and estates. I felt a sudden, sharp, and entirely new urge. The urge to know. I was not a fool. I am not a fool. To play the part of the perfect brainless wife for 50 years requires a certain intelligence. You have to know what not to see, what not to hear. And now, I needed to see and hear everything. I was pulling out a heavy, leather-bound ledger when the door opened. Ah, Margaret, there you are. Arthur Finch. He had been Robert's accountant, his golf partner, his closest confidant for 30 years. He was a man who moved through life on oiled casters, all smooth surfaces and reassuring smiles. He was 68, but affected the vigor of a man of 50, his tailoring immaculate, a faint scent of expensive cologne preceding him. Arthur, I said, closing the drawer. I felt almost guilty, like a child caught snooping. My dear girl, he said, gliding into the room. He always called me, my dear girl, as if I were a delicate debutante and not a woman who had buried her husband. You shouldn't be in this dusty old room. It's morbid. He was followed by James, my son, 50 years old, with his father's height but none of his substance. James had his father's expensive tastes, but a mortal allergy to the work that paid for them. He looked exhausted, his eyes puffy. Mother, Arthur's right, James said, his voice whiny. We were looking for you. We need to, talk. They settled into the leather client chairs opposite the desk. I remained in Robert's chair. It felt wrong, and then it felt right. James, Arthur, thank you for coming. Nonsense, nonsense, Arthur said, leaning forward, clasping his hands. He arranged his face into a mask of profound, professional sorrow. Robert was, well, he was more than a client. He was my best friend. And my first priority, Margaret, is you. Protecting you. Ensuring you don't have to worry about a single solitary thing. That's very kind, Arthur, I said. But I'd like to understand the finances. Arthur's smile became brighter, somehow more false. Robert was a very smart man. He set everything up perfectly. A firewall, if you will, to protect you from the complexities. The numbers are frankly grubby. He wouldn't want you to. I want to see the ledgers, I said. The words just came out. They surprised me as much as they clearly surprised them. James shifted, uncomfortable. Mother, what for? It's all just jargon. You'll give yourself a headache. Nevertheless, James, I'd like to see them. I looked at Arthur. His smile was still there, but it had hardened. It was no longer reassuring. It was a shield. He gave a soft, paternal chuckle. It was the most insulting sound I had ever heard. And then he said it. The line that changed everything. The line that snapped a lifetime of curated ignorance in half. My dear, he said, his voice a buttery, condescending purr. Don't trouble yourself with those old ledgers. He actually reached across the desk and patted my hand, the hand that was resting on the desk of my husband of 51 years. Robert never wanted you to be burdened, he continued, oblivious, and I, as his executor, and James, as your loving son, intend to honor that. We will handle the entire estate. All you need to do is, well, grieve. And perhaps, he glanced around the room, think about redecorating. I looked at my son. James was nodding, his expression one of shallow, earnest agreement. He's right, Mother. It's for the best. You've got your garden. You've got your clubs. Let us handle the dirty work. Don't trouble yourself, your pretty head. Let us handle the dirty work. Something inside me, something that had been dormant for half a century, woke up. It was a cold, sharp, and utterly unfamiliar rage. But my face, trained by decades of polite dinner parties, remained a perfect mask of mild, grandmotherly confusion. "Oh," I said, pulling my hand back slowly. "Oh dear. You're right, of course." I forced a little, watery tremor into my voice. "It's all so overwhelming. I don't know what I was thinking." Arthur beamed. He had won. He was the man, the professional, and I was just the silly old woman. "That's my girl," he said, rising. "Now, I've had some simple documents drawn up, just to transfer Robert's assets into a new family trust. It will protect you from probate, taxes, all the ugly bits. James and I will be the trustees, just to manage things for you. It's what Robert wanted." "A trust?" I asked, feigning confusion. "The Winslow Legacy Trust," James supplied, standing up. "It's all sorted, Mother. Arthur is a genius. You'll sign and everything. All this just goes away. You'll get a generous monthly allowance, of course." An allowance. I was 74 years old, and my son had just offered me an allowance. "Oh, thank you, James. Thank you, Arthur," I whispered, looking down at my hands. "You are both so kind. I just need some time to process." "Of course, my dear," Arthur said, patting his breast pocket. "Take a day or two. I'll have my girl send the papers over, sign them, and we can put all this unpleasantness behind us." They left. James gave me an awkward, one-armed hug. Arthur gave me a sympathetic, knowing nod. I sat in that study for 2 hours. I didn't move. I didn't cry. I just listened to the echo of their words. Don't trouble yourself. They didn't see a grieving widow. They saw an opportunity. They saw a doddering old fool. They saw what Robert had trained them to see. And in that moment, I knew. I didn't know what I knew, but I knew. They were hiding something. The way Arthur's eyes had slid past the ledger I'd been touching, the way James, my own son, couldn't quite meet my gaze, the eagerness, the rush to get me to sign papers for a trust I'd never heard of. I was a widow. I was a mother. I was a 74-year-old woman who was famous for her prize-winning hydrangeas and her 7-layer lemon cake. And I was, it seemed, about to learn accounting. The next day, I was in the garden. My roses needed deadheading. It's a brutal, necessary task. You have to cut away the dead wood, the spent blooms, to force new, vibrant growth. I found the work clarifying. "Heavens, Marge, you're a vision," called my neighbor Cynthia from over the fence. "Out here already? You are just so strong." "It's good to keep busy, Cynthia," I called back, snipping a faded brown-edged peace rose with a definitive thwack. "Idleness is the devil's workshop, isn't that what they say?" I played the part to perfection. I was Marge Winslow, the brave, slightly dazed widow. I baked. I delivered a lemon cake to Arthur's office. Just a little something, I told his secretary, who cooed at me, to say thank you for, well, for everything. I hosted my bridge club. I listened to the gossip, the endless chatter of women who, like me, had been insulated from the grubby world of their husband's business. Arthur Finch is a saint, one of them, Mary declared. He handled my cousin's estate and found so much money. She's set for life. Found, I thought, or relocated. My days were a performance of placid grief. My nights were mine. At 2 a.m., the house is a different entity. It doesn't belong to the living, it belongs to the past. I would slip out of my bed, trading my lace-trimmed nightgown for a dark sweatsuit, and go to Robert's study. I locked the door. The ledgers Arthur kept, the official ones he'd so kindly left in the desk, were, as I suspected, immaculate. They were balanced to the penny. They were, in fact, too perfect. Robert was a brilliant man, but he was also a chaotic one. His true genius was in messy, inspired, borderline legal ventures. These clean books were a fiction. So, where was the truth? I thought about Robert. I thought about our 51 years. He was a man of secrets, but he was also a man of habit. He didn't trust banks, not really. He didn't trust computers. He trusted himself. And, in a strange way, he trusted me. I scoured the room. I ran my fingers along the spines of the identical leather-bound classics he'd never read. The Iliad, Moby Dick, The Art of War. And then I saw it. It wasn't on the shelf. It was on the desk in the ornate silver cup where he kept his pens. A single bright red cartridge-filled fountain pen. My heart stopped. It was the pen I had given him on our 25th anniversary. He had laughed. "What am I going to do with this, Marge? It's red. I'm not a school teacher." "It's for the important things," I had said, teasing him. "Things you really don't want to forget." He'd used it, I knew, but only, he claimed, for fiddling. I looked at the shelf again. The Art of War. It was his favorite, in theory. I pulled it out. The binding was stiff. It had clearly never been opened. I pulled out Moby Dick. The same. Then I pulled out a tattered, worn copy of Pride and Prejudice. It was my copy, from college. He had teased me about it relentlessly. Silly, romantic fluff, Marge. Why was it in his study, tucked between Plato and Caesar? I opened it, and inside, tucked into the spine, was a small brass key. I knew instantly where it went. Behind the grand full-length portrait of Robert's grandfather, there was a wall safe. I had always assumed it held my jewelry and his watch collection. I swung the painting aside. The safe was there. Not a modern digital one, but an old combination and key model. I didn't know the combination. I sat on the floor, my mind racing. Robert was a man of ego and sentiment in that order. The code would be James's birthday? I tried 12-04-74. Nothing. Our anniversary? 6-18-73. Nothing. The day he founded the company? 10-01-68. Nothing. I sighed, frustrated. I looked at the red pen in my hand. Things you really don't want to forget. What was the one thing he was proudest of? The one number he quoted constantly, the one that proved his worth? I spun the dial, 40-05-90. The day he'd cleared his first $1 million. I heard the clunk of the tumblers. I inserted the key. I turned. The heavy steel door swung open. It wasn't jewelry. It wasn't watches. It wasn't cash. It was one single, unremarkable, dark green, cloth-bound notebook. The kind you buy at a stationery store. And on the cover, in Robert's familiar, aggressive script, was one word: acorns. My breath caught. Acorns was our code. It was the name we'd given our first terrible one-room apartment in the city, the one with the squirrel nesting in the wall. It was our private joke. From little acorns, Marge, he would say, mighty messy oaks will grow. This was it. This was his real ledger. I took it back to the desk. I opened the red pen. I took a deep breath. The first page was dated January 1st, 1995. It wasn't written in English, not really. It was written in our code, a simple substitution cipher we'd invented as teenagers to pass notes in class: A equals Z, B equals Y, C equals X, and so on. It was childish, it was silly, and it was the most brilliant thing he'd ever done, because only one other person in the world knew it: me. My hands were shaking as I took a pad of paper and began to translate. It took me 3 nights. The first night, I was just confused. The entries were cryptic: GHF 1.5 million sent to AF in the Cayman Islands. Bayside prop 10% sent to JW for the college fund. On the second night, the pattern began to emerge. AF was Arthur Finch. JW was James Winslow. And GHF was a Galloway Holdings fund I had never heard of. By the third night, I was no longer confused. I was sitting in the dark, the banker's lamp casting a green, sickly glow on the pages, and I was weeping not for Robert, not for myself. I was weeping from a rage so profound, so cold, it felt like it might freeze my very blood. It was all there, 30 years of systematic, meticulous, and utterly monstrous theft. Arthur Finch had not been Robert's friend. He had been a parasite. He had started small, skimming from expense accounts. But as Robert's empire grew, so did Arthur's ambition. He'd created shell corporations, like Galloway Holdings, to buy properties from Winslow Industries at a fraction of their value, only to resell them at a massive profit that went straight into Arthur's offshore accounts. Robert wasn't stupid. He had known. That was the part that made me stop. I reread the entries. AF, Skim, 98, 500K, I see you. AF Bayside 2.1.2 million. Getting bold, Arthur. Robert had been tracking him. He had known for decades that his best friend was robbing him blind. Why? Why let it happen? I kept reading. BK, Senator. The Marina Project owes me. See File 22B. LM, Rival. Insider Trade. 09, owes me. See File 40A. My God, it wasn't just a ledger, it was a blackmail book. Robert hadn't been a victim, he'd been a puppet master. He'd let Arthur steal, just enough to have a hook in him. He'd let his rivals break the law, and he'd documented it. He'd built his empire not just on concrete, but on the sins of other men. I felt sick. The man I had loved, or the man I had thought I loved, was a stranger, a cold, calculating, and terrifyingly brilliant monster. And then I found the last entries. The handwriting was different. Shaker, dated 6 months ago. James, Miami, 200,000, from GHF, my own son. AF put him up to it. The weakness, he was always weak. I had to put the book down. My son, my James, he hadn't just known about the theft. He had participated. He had taken money from the man who was robbing his own father. The last entry was from 3 months ago, just before Robert died. The trust, AF and JW think I don't know. The legacy trust. They're going to use it to lock her out. They think Marge is a fool. They think, I'm done. Maybe I am. He knew. He knew his accountant and his own son were planning to steal his entire company from his widow, from me, the second he was in the ground. And he did. Nothing. He wrote it in his silly, coded book, and he died. The Winslow Legacy Trust papers that Arthur had just drawn up had been in the works for months. They were waiting for him to die. They were waiting for me to be blindsided by grief, to be the pretty head that didn't want to be troubled. They were going to leave me with an allowance. I closed the book. The rage was gone. The tears were gone. The grief was gone. In their place was a clarity so sharp it was almost painful. I knew what Robert had been. I knew what Arthur was. I knew what my son had become. They think Marge is a fool. "All right, Robert," I whispered into the silent, dark room. "You kept your secrets. Now I'll keep mine." I put the green notebook back in the safe. I locked it. I put the key back in Pride and Prejudice. I put the book back on the shelf. I turned off the light. I went to bed, and for the first time since Robert's death, I slept like a baby. My transformation was, on the surface, non-existent. To the outside world, I was Marge, the grieving widow. I bought a new, rather dowdy black dress for formal mourning. I let my hair go an extra week between salon appointments. When James and Arthur called, I sounded frail, confused. "The papers, Mother?" James would ask, his voice tight with impatience. "Oh, goodness, James, yes. The legacy papers. I just can't bring myself to look at them. All those words, it's too much. Give your old mother another week." "Of course, Mother. Of course, just don't lose them." Lose them? I thought, looking at the documents which I had photocopied, scanned, and emailed to a brand new encrypted email address. Oh, James, I'm just getting started. While Marge gardened, Margaret was at war. I took Robert's Acorn book. I didn't need the book itself, just the information. I rented a small, anonymous office in the city under the name L.M. Bennett, my maiden name and my mother's maiden name. I bought a burner phone. I began with Robert's blackmail. File 22 BBK, Senator. I found the file. It was in a storage unit Robert rented under a false name. It was compromising. Photos, bank statements, a marina project that was built on, well, let's just say it wasn't built on solid ground. I called the senator's private line. "Who is this?" he barked. "This is a friend of the late Robert Winslow," I said, my voice disguised by a simple digital modulator. "I'm calling about the Marina project, file 22B. I believe it's time we had a review of the board." There was a long, heavy silence. "What do you want?" "A vote," I said. "When the time comes, I will need your vote. And your silence. In exchange, File 22B and all its copies will cease to exist." He didn't argue. He just said, "When?" "I will let you know," I said, and hung up. One down. File 40ALM, rival. Mr. L. Moretti, a man who had tried to buy Robert out, hostile takeover style. 3 times Robert had despised him, and apparently had caught him on a very illegal, very well-documented insider trade. I called him. "Moretti?" "Mr. Moretti, my name is Margaret Winslow, Robert Winslow's widow." "Mrs. Winslow," he said, his voice instantly wary. "My condolences. Robert was a fighter." He was, wasn't he? He was also a meticulous note-keeper. I've just been reviewing his files. File 40A, to be precise. It concerns your remarkable success with the Gentech stock in 2009. The silence on his end was so profound I thought he might have fainted. What, what do you want, Mrs. Winslow? He finally whispered. Robert, I said, was a bully. I, I'm not. I don't want your money, Mr. Moretti. I want your help. Arthur Finch has been running my husband's company into the ground, and he and my son are trying to steal it from me. Finch? He spat. That slick bastard, I never trusted him. Neither do I. I need an ally on the board, someone who knows where Arthur has buried the other bodies. He laughed, a short, sharp, ugly sound. Mrs. Winslow, I think this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship. 2. I didn't stop there. Robert's book was a map to the secret levers of power in this city. I pulled every lever. I called in every debt. I didn't threaten, I just reminded. I traded their secrets for my security. By the end of 2 months, I had the silent, terrified, and absolute loyalty of 4 of the 7 board members of Winslow Holdings. My next step was the IRS. I sent an anonymous, very detailed, and beautifully documented tip about a certain Galloway Holdings fund, complete with offshore account numbers and transfer dates, all courtesy of Robert's little green book. I suggested they might want to look into the personal finances of one Mr. Arthur Finch. Finally, I dealt with my son. This was the hardest. He was still my James, my boy, the one I had rocked to sleep, the one who had given me a macaroni picture frame in the 3rd grade. He was also a weak, greedy, and faithless man who had conspired to rob his own mother. I had to know which man he was truly. I called him to the house for tea. "Mother, you look well," he said, surprised. The frail, confused act was, perhaps, wearing thin. "I'm feeling stronger, dear," I said, pouring him a cup of Earl Grey. "James, I've been thinking about you, about your future. My future. Without your father, I worry. You have such expensive tastes, James and Roberts. Well, Robert was always so hard on you about money." He looked down, the picture of a misunderstood, long-suffering son. "He was, Mother. He never understood me." "I know, dear. I know." I reached across and patted his hand. My hand, not Arthur's. "And this allowance from the trust, it just doesn't seem like enough. For all the work you'll be doing, for all the help you've given Arthur." His eyes lit up, not with love, not with concern, with greed. It was as clear and as ugly as a rat in a bread box. "Well, I mean, I am doing a lot, Mother. Arthur says I have a real head for it." "I'm sure you do," I said, my voice soft. "James, I want you to have this." I slid a check across the table. It was for $50,000. "Mother," he gasped, just a little something, from me to you, for being such a good son, for taking care of everything." He took the check. He didn't question it. He didn't ask if I could afford it. He just took it. "But James," I added, as he was folding it into his pocket, "one little thing, I just can't bear to have all those friends of your father's over here. The sympathy calls are just exhausting. I'd like to have one final dinner to say thank you, to close this chapter. Can you and Arthur arrange it? Just our closest friends. The board, Mr. Moretti, perhaps? A goodbye dinner." "A dinner?" he said, confused. "Yes, and I'd like to sign the papers then, the legacy papers, in front of everyone, to show them that the family is united, that we're all moving forward, together." His face broke into a smile so wide and so genuine it was terrifying. He thought I was finally totally in his pocket. "Mother, that's a wonderful idea," he said, standing up, suddenly energized. It's it's symbolic. I'll tell Arthur. He'll be so pleased." "Oh, Mother, you're a brick. This is the right thing to do." "Yes, James," I said, smiling my sweet grandmotherly smile. "It is. It's the right thing to do." I watched him walk out of the house, his step lighter than it had been in months. He was already spending the 50,000. He was already tasting the millions. I went to the kitchen and picked up the phone. I called my caterer. "Hello, Jean, it's Margaret Winslow. I'm planning a dinner party." "Yes, about 12. And Jean, let's make it special. The full classical 6-course affair. I'm feeling celebratory." The trap was set. The bait was taken. And the mice? The mice were practically giddy. Which brings us back to the dining room. The chandelier is blazing. The faces around the table are a mixture of shock, confusion, and, in the case of Mr. Moretti and Senator BK, a kind of grim, fascinated satisfaction. Arthur's frozen smile has melted. He looks gray, old. James is sputtering. "Mother, you're confused. The grief. It's Arthur. Tell her she's confused." Arthur Finch says nothing. His eyes are locked on mine. He knows. He doesn't know how I know, but he knows that I know. The predator has just realized that the helpless little rabbit it was stalking is, in fact, a wolf. "Confused?" I say, picking up my wine glass. "No, James, I don't think I am. I am, however, overwrought. I'm overwrought that my accountant of 30 years thought he could create a Galloway Holdings fund to siphon millions from my husband, and I'm very overwrought that my only son helped him." A gasp from Mary, the bridge player. "Arthur," I continue, my voice conversational, "I've been reviewing Robert's private notes, the ones he kept in well, let's call it an acorn file." The last bit of color drains from Arthur's face. He knows that code. Robert must have used it on him once, a long time ago. He kept meticulous records, Arthur, of everything. Your creative accounting, your offshore ventures, and, oh dear, he also kept records on others. I turn my gaze to Senator BK. "Senator, so glad you could make it. Robert was so proud of his contributions to your marina project, he kept a whole file on it." The senator visibly pales, but nods, a silent contract being fulfilled. I look at Mr. Moretti. "And Mr. Moretti, thank you for coming. Robert so admired your timing in the stock market, particularly with Gentech. He followed it very, very closely." Moretti just sips his wine, his eyes glittering. "You see, Arthur," I say, "Robert was a complicated man. He built his house on very shaky foundations, and he left me the blueprints. This is slander," Arthur finally manages, his voice a reedy imitation of its former baritone. It's the ramblings of a hysterical widow?" I finish for him. "Is that what I am? Then you won't mind, I'm sure, that 2 gentlemen from the Internal Revenue Service are waiting in my drawing room. They are very keen to discuss the Galloway Fund with you. They've been auditing you for the past month. I believe they have a warrant." Arthur stands up so fast his chair screeches and topples over. "And as for the board," I continue, my voice rising just enough to carry, "I have just received the proxies of Senator BK, Mr. Moretti, and 2 other members who couldn't be here tonight. combined with my own controlling shares, which I assure you, I will not be signing into any legacy trust. I believe that makes me the new chairwoman of Winslow Holdings. My first act tomorrow morning will be to vote for a full forensic audit of the last 30 years. James has his head in his hands. He's making a strange, sobbing, hiccuping sound. James, I say, and my voice for a moment is soft. All the steel is gone. Oh, James, look at me! He looks up, his face a mess of tears and snot and utter childish terror. Mother, I'm sorry, he made me. He said it was just borrowing. He said, I gave it back. You took a check from me 3 days ago, James, I say, and the steel is back. $50,000. Was that borrowing too? Or was that your allowance? He has no answer. I stand up. I am 74 years old. I am 5'3", and I feel, for the first time in my life, like the tallest person in any room. Gentlemen, I say to the table at large. Ladies, I apologize for ruining dessert. Arthur, the gentlemen in the drawing room are to your left. Please, don't trouble yourself with your coat. I'm afraid you won't be needing it. Arthur Finch, the smooth, the slick, the saint, doesn't even look at me. He just turns, like a man in a dream, and walks out of the dining room. We hear the door to the drawing room open, and a low, polite, Mr. Finch, we'd like to ask you a few questions. The dinner party dissolves. People scatter, whispering, their eyes wide, not wanting to be associated with the mess. Soon it's just James and me. In the vast, silent, food-strewn room, he's still crying. What? What's going to happen to me? He whimpers. I look at my son, my hollow, greedy 50-year-old boy. I feel nothing, just a vast, empty, windswept pity. I don't know, James, I say, walking past him. That's no longer my concern. I've taken care of my future. You will have to take care of yours. But the company, the house, my inheritance. I stop at the door. I turn. I give him a small, sad smile. James, my dear, I say, borrowing a line, don't trouble yourself with it. I have been chairwoman of Winslow Holdings for 6 months. We are thriving. It turns out pruning dead wood is my specialty. Robert's files were a wonderful incentive for the rest of the board to fall in line. They are all now my most loyal supporters. Arthur Finch will be in prison for a very, very long time. His sainthood didn't hold up well in court, James. James is in Miami. He's working, a real job, selling timeshares. He calls sometimes. He sounds smaller. I still live in the big house, but it's my house now. I'm redecorating. I've turned Robert's study into my own. It's painted a light, airy blue. The Acorn book is in my desk drawer. I read it sometimes to remind myself. They all saw me as a role. The wife, the mother, the widow. They saw a fragile, silly, ornamental old woman. They saw Marge. They forgot about Margaret. They told me not to trouble myself with the numbers. They forgot. A woman who can run a household, manage a staff, and host a flawless 12-person dinner party is a woman who has been keeping score her entire life.